Close your eyes and drift into the smoky haze of history, where the underworld was ruled not by laws of governments but by codes of silence, loyalty, and blood. Tonight, I will take you into the lives of men whose names carried weight in whispers, names that stretched across Little Italy, Chicago, and beyond. Men like Joe Bonanno, caught in the infamous Banana War, Joe Masseria, a boss of bosses who rose high but fell harder, and Tony Accardo, the quiet powerhouse of Chicago. Their stories overlap, cross, and diverge like rivers flowing into the ocean of organized crime. And in the calm rhythm of memory, we'll travel through their world, where honor, greed, and betrayal wrote the script of their lives. Joe Bonanno was born Giuseppe Carlo Bonanno in 1905, in Castellammarese del Golfo, Sicily, a fishing village that gave the American Mafia some of its toughest men. To understand Bonanno, you must understand that he was shaped not just by the poverty of Sicily but by the traditions of Cosa Nostra, the Sicilian Mafia that emphasized family, loyalty, and secrecy above all. At 15, he fled fascist Italy and found his way to America, settling in New York. There, among immigrants struggling to find their footing, he saw an opportunity not in factories or sweatshops but in the shadows. By the time he was 26, Joe Bonanno was already a mafia boss. Imagine that, a young man, slender, quiet, barely 30, holding the keys to one of the 5 families of New York. This was the Bonanno family, which would carry his name for generations. He earned respect through his intelligence, calm demeanor, and unwavering adherence to the old Sicilian ways. Where others might bluster, Bonanno preferred diplomacy. But don't mistake his calm for weakness. In the underworld, kindness and cruelty often walked side by side, and Joe knew when to extend a hand and when to pull the trigger. Yet Bonanno's story cannot be told without speaking of the Banana War, a bloody internal struggle that nearly tore his family apart. It was the 1960s, decades after Bonanno had risen to power. By then, the Mafia had grown into a colossal force in America: gambling, loan sharking, narcotics, labor racketeering, and construction. Everyone wanted a piece. The Commission, the ruling council of the 5 families, tried to maintain balance. But Bonanno, ambitious and stubborn, wanted more influence. He plotted to dominate the Commission itself, aligning with Joe Magliocco in a conspiracy to assassinate rivals, including Tommy Lucchese and Carlo Gambino. But conspiracies often unravel, and this one did. Word leaked, and Bonanno suddenly became a hunted man. Kidnappings, shootings, betrayals, what followed was the Banana War. Bonanno's loyalists, led by his son Bill, battled against a faction loyal to Gaspar di Gregorio, who was installed by the Commission to replace Bonanno. Streets of Brooklyn echoed with gunfire as family turned against family, soldiers against captains, nephews against uncles. For years, the war raged, and bodies piled. What had once been one of the most disciplined families became fractured. Bonanno himself disappeared for long stretches, claiming later he had been kidnapped, though many believed he orchestrated his own vanishing act to avoid his enemies. And while Bonanno fought his war, history whispered the name of Joe Masseria, another figure who had defined an earlier generation of mafia power. Joe, the boss, Masseria came before Bonanno's prime, ruling in the 1920s, a time when prohibition turned gangsters into kings. Born in Sicily in 1886, Masseria climbed the ladder in New York's underworld with cunning and brutality. By the late 1920s, he had declared himself boss of bosses, capo di tutti capi, demanding tribute from other mafia leaders. His rule, however, sparked resentment. Not everyone wanted one man holding the crown. Masseria's enemies rallied behind a rival, Salvatore Maranzano, another Castellammarese like Bonanno. This led to the Castellammarese War, a bloody conflict between Masseria's forces and Maranzano's men. Streets ran red from 1929 to 1931. Men were shot down in barber chairs, ambushed at restaurants, and gunned down on sidewalks. Joe Bonanno, young and ambitious, sided with Maranzano. He admired Maranzano's vision of restructuring the Mafia into something more organized, something like the Roman legions, orderly, disciplined, hierarchical. When Masseria was betrayed by his own lieutenant, Charles Lucky Luciano, and murdered in 1931 at a Coney Island restaurant, the war ended. Maranzano declared himself capo di tutti capi, and Joe Bonanno, at just 26, was rewarded with his own family. Yet power shifts quickly in the underworld. Maranzano himself was killed months later, also betrayed by Luciano, who despised the very idea of a boss of bosses. Instead, Luciano created the commission, where each family had a seat, a council of equals to maintain peace. Bonanno thrived in this new order, respected for his loyalty and Sicilian discipline. The lesson of Masseria's fall was etched in his mind: overreach leads to downfall. But decades later, in the Banana War, Bonanno himself would test the balance and nearly lose everything. Now let us drift westward, away from New York's crowded streets, to Chicago, where another kind of underworld grew. In Chicago, the outfit was different. They did not follow the five families structure, nor did they call themselves Mafia. But they were just as ruthless, just as disciplined. And in their ranks rose Tony Accardo, the man they called Joe Batters. Tony Accardo was born in 1906 in Chicago, to Italian immigrant parents. Unlike Bonanno or Masseria, he did not come from Sicily, but from the rough streets of America. At 14, he dropped out of school and fell into street gangs. By the 1920s, during Prohibition, he caught the eye of Al Capone himself. Legend says that Capone gave him his nickname after seeing Accardo beat two men with a baseball bat, remarking, "This kid's a real Joe Batters." It was both a compliment and a prophecy. Accardo became Capone's bodyguard and enforcer, moving up quickly through the outfit's ranks. But where Capone was flashy, Accardo was reserved. He lived quietly, avoided cameras, and rarely raised his voice. Yet behind his calm demeanor was a man of cold efficiency. When Capone fell to prison and Frank Nitti took over, Accardo's influence grew. By the 1940s, he was the power behind the throne, guiding the outfit into new ventures. Unlike the chaotic gun battles of New York, Chicago under Accardo became a business machine. They infiltrated labor unions, controlled casinos, skimmed millions from Las Vegas, and invested in legitimate enterprises. Accardo believed in discretion. He lived in the suburbs, in a modest house, played with his grandchildren, and barbecued in the backyard. But make no mistake, those who crossed him vanished. Stories of bodies turning up in fields, of men disappearing after displeasing Accardo, became part of outfit folklore. He was the kind of boss who did not need to shout, his silence was enough. And yet, across time and geography, these men, Bonanno, Masseria, Accardo, were bound by the same code. Omerta, the code of silence. Loyalty above all. Betrayal meant death. Each man embodied a different era of organized crime. Masseria, the brute who tried to be king. Bonanno, the young boss who embraced tradition but nearly lost everything in ambition. Accardo, the quiet strategist who turned the outfit into a fortress of power. When you think of Bonanno, think of a man caught between old and new, trying to hold on to Sicilian values while navigating the temptations of American power. When you think of Masseria, think of arrogance that brought ruin. And when you think of Accardo, think of the patient chess player, moving pieces without anyone realizing until checkmate. The Banana War ended eventually, leaving scars on the Bonanno family that lasted decades. Bonanno retired, wrote a book, and lived longer than most of his contemporaries, dying in 2002 at the age of 97. Joe Masseria died young, betrayed at a restaurant table, his meal unfinished. Tony Accardo lived nearly as long as Bonanno, dying in 1992, still powerful, still respected, never once having served a full prison sentence. 3 men, 3 lives, woven into the fabric of America's underworld. So now, as you close your eyes, imagine the smoke-filled rooms, the whispered conversations in Italian, the clink of glasses over blood oaths, and the shadows where power moved unseen. These were men who built empires in silence, who ruled not with crowns but with fear and loyalty. And in their stories, you hear not just the tale of crime, but of ambition, survival, and the eternal dance between power and downfall. Sleep now, with their ghosts lingering in memory, drifting back into the darkness from which they came.